Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learn from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Hi, it's Zoe, and I've got a question for you. When it comes to finding a great place to work, how do you know you fit in? Largely, I think we know it when we feel it. We feel good where we work, and we just feel like we belong. But can you craft that deliberately? Can you investigate the aspects of the organization ahead of time so you can figure out whether or not it's worth your time and energy to be there? And as a leader, more importantly, how do you craft the context, the conditions, so that people feel like they fit in, so they can do their best work? Well, these are questions my guest today has wrestled with, both through her own lived experience and through her research and through what she now does in her work. Her name is Aoife O'Brien, and she's from beautiful Ireland. That was my really sad attempt at an Irish accent. She's from Ireland. She has had a successful corporate career, 17 years in the corporate land, working for global companies like Coca-Cola, Unilever, and Heinz. And her task there was to solve marketing problems using data analytics. At some point, though, she threw in the corporate towel and became a corporate refugee to set up her own empire. And she now is the CEO of her own business called Happier at Work. She is a delight. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think you will really get a huge amount of insight from her own trials and tribulations as a leader, learning what to do and what not to do, as well as the deep dive into her research about what it means to fit in. If you love this episode, if you love the podcast, please feel free to rate and review the podcast. We're doing a giveaway in March, but you can get ahead of the curve and do it now. Just email us what you wrote afterwards and let us know which platform you reviewed us on. And you will definitely get one of the cool, awesome things that we're going to give away in March in exchange for your fabulous review. Okay, in the meantime, go ahead and listen to this one because it's a goodie. Let's go. Aoife O'Brien, all the way from lovely Ireland. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Zoe. Thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to chat to you today.
We were just having a giggle before we hit record about Aoife. And I said, what's your last name, Aoife? Because it's such a fabulous name. You forget the last name. It's like Madonna, right? It's just, I just know you as Aoife, the goddess.
Not as yet, Zoe, but maybe one day.
Oh, great. Well, it's so exciting to have an Irish leader on the show. And I know you have a passion for people as I do.
Yeah.
Tell me about, when did you first have an experience as a leader? What happened?
That's, interesting question. I suppose for me, leadership it's really about, I suppose my concept of leadership has developed over time. So when I first became a manager, let's say, or put in the position of authority, that's when I felt I first became a leader. And that happened when I lived in Australia, actually. I lived in Australia for about 2.5 years. And it was a bit of a shock. You're kind of suddenly responsible for this other person and how they get their work done, and they don't do work how you do work. And so that, for me, it was a huge learning. That's when I first stepped into what I would consider, at that time, at least, a real leadership role. And prior to that, I had loads of training. So in the company I worked in prior, they developed people at an early stage in their careers to step up to that kind of leadership and management position, which I thought was really, really great, and a great foundation for me to be able to step into that next level, if you like. But I suppose my perception of leadership has evolved over time. And at the time I was working there, when I reflect on it, when I look back, I see that the actual leadership, so those senior leaders in the business weren't really a cohesive team. It was a bit of a toxic environment if I look back on it today. And I didn't really feel that I got that level of support that I needed in order to step up to that new role. So it's kind of an interesting transition. And as I mentioned, my own perception of what a leader is has sort of evolved over time. So, and it's evolved a lot in how the discussions that I have with various people since I've left my corporate career and the discussions I have on my podcast as well, you know, my perception of what makes a real leader. And you might agree with this, Zoe, it's about being in a position where people want to actually follow you. It's not about a status, it's not about a label or anything like that. It's being in a position where you are surrounded by people who want to actually follow you in some way. So you can't have a leader without having a follower.
I think that's a good starting point, right? Leadership is not a solo activity. So I'm curious, what was your first impression of leadership? What did you first think leadership was?
For me, I think it was management. So it's being a manager. And I've really learned the distinction between those two concepts in the duration of my career. So for me, that's what leadership was. So you step up to the next level, you start managing people, and then by default, you are a leader. You are leading people, or at least that's what I thought.
Yeah, right. Okay. So the position, like it was all about authority, really.
Yeah.
You're in charge and so on. And then, as you said, over the course of time, you figured, it's not really just about having authority and telling people what to do. It's about bringing people together and creating an experience or a vision, I'm guessing, you can tell me, and that people buy into.
It's about, for me, yeah, it's the leader and the follower, but it's also bringing out the best in other people. And I think some people have that skill, and it's kind of an inherent and a natural skill that people have, that they can bring out the best in others, but not everybody has that skill. So the more I think of it, the more I think, do I have that skill? Do I need to hone that skill? Can I learn how to do that? You know, so I suppose there's a couple of different intricacies there as well.
I think bringing out the best in others is definitely something that we need to do as leaders. It's a key responsibility. Absolutely. And asking yourself that question, can I do it? Do I have the skill? How did you answer that? Can you do it? Have you got the skill?
Maybe it's not a natural ability of mine, or at least that's not how, when I learned about leadership, it was all about this, like, this is how you manage people. And we learned these different techniques for managing people. But I don't think at any point anyone said to me, your job as a leader is to bring out the best in your team. It became apparent after a while when people were asking me questions like, oh, so Stefan, he's really good at analytics. What are you doing to kind of facilitate that or to enable him to be able to do that? And I kind of thought, oh, so is that part of my role? Like no one really explicitly told me that that's what I was supposed to do. So it became apparent. And, you know, and I suppose it's knowing the difference between when you need to step in to facilitate that and when people are sort of capable and they're kind of comfortable and happy in what they're doing. And maybe that's a level of frustration where I always like to see people as being really, really ambitious and wanting to reach that next level and wanting to better themselves. But when someone isn't, or when someone, you know, is comfortable where they are, let's say, I don't really understand that. And maybe that's kind of an issue that I need to work on as well.
You get frustrated with people who aren't ambitious.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I just don't understand it.
Yeah, that's right. So have you come to a better understanding of people who aren't ambitious?
Yeah, I think so. I think some people are just comfortable where they are and they don't have that level, the same level of ambition, I suppose, that I have. I know certainly when I in a perhaps a very arrogant way, I know when I started in some companies, I was like, I would love to get to CEO someday. Like that is where I would like to go. Perhaps it wasn't clear on the steps that I needed to take in order to get to those levels. And I suppose now it's like, okay, so I can be CEO of my own company and grow it from the ground up and kind of build it that way.
So this idea that other people wouldn't be interested in doing that is I guess it sounds like you've come to a bit of peace with that. It's like, I'm like that, they're not like that.
Yeah, yeah. Some people are just not like that. And I think maybe that's part of being an effective leader, is understanding the differences between people. So it's about bringing out the best and being able to facilitate that. But if someone's best is they are comfortable doing that, yeah.
I think understanding differences is pretty critical because,
Mm,
interesting, I was speaking to another author this week, actually, and we were talking about cultures and how the culture of an organization can gravitate around a certain type of behavior.
right.
And if you don't like that kind of behavior, you get spat out by the culture. I think that's one type of philosophy. It's like, we're all like this, either you fit in or you're out. Or there's a box of chocolates version where we need diversity of skill and approach, etc. What's your opinion? Do you think to have a healthy culture, it's best if you have like a uniform type of behavior preference? Or can you have a good culture where everybody's just a wee bit different?
That is such an interesting question, and something I'm so, so passionate about as well. As I mentioned, I have experienced toxic cultures in my time, and I think there's a real difference with that. So for me, culture, and you use that term fit and fitting in, to me, that's really, really important. I did my master's dissertation research all about this concept of fitting in. I had a wonderful conversation with my lecturer. I explained the situations or the circumstances that I had had in work in the past. And she said, "Oh, that's all about fit, environmental fit, organizational fit. Perhaps that's something that you would like to do your research on." So I started doing my research on that, and I absolutely love it. For me, I think diversity is really critical. I think it's really, really important, but it's marrying that with people who have values that are aligned. So for me, to create an effective culture, you need to have aligned values. And I'm not talking about those values that people have on the wall. I'm not talking about the values that they have in their email signature. I'm talking about the behavior that people display in a workplace. And I'm talking about how decisions are made. And it's one thing to say we value things like fairness and equality. And it's another thing then just to give someone a promotion because of some sort of politics or something like that. So that goes against the values. And anyone who holds those values then gets kind of rubbed up the wrong way. I would love to do some further research into that specifically, because I had one conversation with a lady where she was like, "Oh, that's just a values issue," and carry on. For me, that's a values issue, and I want out of there because that goes against my values. And I want to work in a company where my values are respected and aligned with the organization. So that's kind of one element to it. Another element of fitting in is this idea of needs satisfaction. So making sure that your needs are being satisfied at work. We all have these three universal basic needs of autonomy, relatedness, and competence. Autonomy being your ability to have a choice and a sense of control over what it is that you do and how you do it. Relatedness then is how you get along with those other people around you. Do you feel like you fit in with them? Can you have a relationship with them? And another thing that is not part of my research, but I think is really interesting to add into that relatedness piece, is how you relate what you do on a day-to-day basis to that bigger picture of what the organization is trying to achieve and how they interrelate. And then the final piece on competence is that feeling of that you're capable of doing your job. And for me, that's where the feedback piece comes in. So in order to feel capable, you need to be getting some sort of feedback, whether that's from your clients, it could be from your colleagues, it could be from your supervisor. You need to feel capable of doing your job in order to have that capability, that competence need met. The other interesting thing about these needs is that they can be over or undersupplied. So we'll take autonomy as an example, where the autonomy need, if you have not enough autonomy, it means that you're being told what to do and you're being told how to do it. And a lot of first-time managers, I think, it's this sense of control, it's the fear of letting go, it's not really sure that other people are different and do things differently, but you come across then as a micromanager, and there's this sense of a lack of trust then that the person on the receiving end feels that you don't trust them to be able to get on with the job and to be able to do the job effectively. And then having not enough, or sorry, that was not enough autonomy, having too much autonomy is when you don't have enough guidance. So you're kind of just left to your own devices. You need to figure things out for yourself. You need to figure out, well, what role do I play in this grander scheme of what the organization is trying to achieve? How am I going to achieve that? What am I going to set for myself? And you're sort of left without a clear direction of which way you're going to go. And the other interesting thing about those needs is that different people will have different levels of those needs within themselves. So as a leader, it's up to you to identify how you are going to make sure that those needs are being satisfied and they're not being oversupplied or they're not being undersupplied. In addition to those three basic universal needs, there are other needs that are unique to individuals. So some people might have a need for status and power. Others might have a need for recognition, for example. So it's about understanding yourself. What are your needs and how are they being satisfied? But being able to have that open conversation with other people about their needs and how they can be satisfied. And I know for me, if you had asked me a few years ago, what are your values? What are your needs? I would have absolutely no clue. We did talk about corporate values, but they were kind of like I mentioned, the ones that are plastered on the wall or that they're in the email signature, they didn't really hold much meaning. We didn't see them displayed. We were asked on an annual basis how we displayed those values. And that was kind of it. Aside from that, if they weren't really valued, I didn't think that they were, we had one value I think was simple. And like anything that we did in the company, it was so bureaucratic, it was far from simple. So it was almost like, so on the one hand, you're saying we have this value of simple. And on the other hand, we have an entirely bureaucratic organization that if you want to send out a marketing email, you need to get approval from someone in the US who's on a different time zone, who's probably managing the entire global workforce that wants to send out marketing emails. So it's really interesting.
Is this touching back on the toxic workplace that you were mentioning before, like the what not to do?
Yes,
Don't
exactly.
talk about simplicity and have a stupid system.
Exactly. The third element then of fitting in, and it's from the research that I've done, it's the least important part. It's interesting because it's how you see people being hired. It's how you see people being promoted. It's this concept of demands and abilities. So what are the demands of the role? And what are the abilities of the person to fulfill those demands? So if you think of when someone is promoted probably for the first time, so let's take it, I think sales team is the prime example that a lot of people use. So someone is a really, really effective salesperson and they go out there, a go-getter, and then they're so good that they get promoted to manage that team and they become that team leader. And suddenly they're not performing because that's not where their skill set is. So the demands abilities is when people are matched with the demands of the role with the abilities of the person. And so when you see, I'll take an example of a job ad where it says you need 3 years experience of doing this, you need 6 years of experience of being a manager. And for me, it's so interesting that that is the way that we hire people typically and promote people. But actually, that's the least important factor with fitting into a role or fitting into an organization. And again, I would love to do a bit more research on this because I think it can be further developed. And I do think it's important to work to your strengths and to understand what your strengths are. And I would definitely love to do more research on that because the research I have done shows that is the least important. And actually the needs satisfaction piece is the most important of all of those three. So for me, when you're hiring someone initially into an organization, that's when the values become important. But when you want to retain staff, that's where the needs, and making sure that people's needs are being satisfied because that's ultimately what drives us.
I love it. That's a very fulsome answer to the question. Should we have diversity or should we have, like, monochrome?
Yeah, you caught me on something I'm so passionate about, and I love to speak about that all the time in relation to culture. I think it's really critical. So for me, kind of going back to answer the question, it is about having that the diversity of thought and the congruence of values. I think is the winning combination. So having people in an organization that think differently but have aligned values. So the things that are important to them, the things that they value are the same, that they are aligned.
That's awesome. So I want to ask you about leadership lessons. Obviously, something triggered you to go off and go and do your master's in this and to do all this extensive research. So along with your experiences being promoted into a manager and learning about leadership and learning as you went, what was a key learning moment for you as a leader?
I'm trying to think, and I'm glad you said learning moment because I know we spoke before we came on air about failures, but I don't necessarily like that term failure. It always is about what you can learn. And I mean, I think there are a lot of learning moments when I can look back. And it's like one of those things for me is, and that's why I was so interested to speak to you about these difficult conversations that people have. I think that's something that I find quite difficult. And definitely when I was a leader of people having those difficult conversations, I found it difficult, and had I had you to kind of bounce ideas off and to coach me through that, I think it would have made a huge difference. But I don't feel like I've reached a stage yet where I know everything. I feel like I'm continuing to learn through having conversations, through interacting with people and things like that. And I'm trying to think of kind of one solid example. I feel like there's loads of different jumbled examples, and it is all about people and people's differences and how do I put myself in the other person's shoes. Maybe that's the kind of the biggest learning, because I know in managing people, I have managed some people who I perceive to be quite difficult. I was managed by someone who was my peer, and then I went on to manage someone who was my peer. So those kind of relationships are quite they're quite difficult, I think.
Tell me about that. Like, tell me about that, being managed by your peer. What was your response or reaction to that when it happened?
Oh, it's not something I'm proud of. Let me say that. It happened when I lived in Australia, and it was a blow, an absolute blow to my own ego. Let's say, I was told, promised, if you like, about 4 different occasions that I would be promoted and what kind of director would you like to be. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. I'm doing really well for myself here. And one day, we were just having a casual conversation. He pulled me into a room and he started talking about my clients. And I thought, oh, this is strange. Why is he talking about my clients? And I said, oh, like what, why are you, they're my clients. Like, why are you talking about my clients? He goes, oh, I'm your new manager. And I thought, whoa.
Oh my God.
Whoa. So yeah, my reaction, let's say, was not positive, and I didn't stay for very much longer. I reacted very poorly in retrospect in terms of how I behaved around him, and I got very frustrated. And equally, the way he managed me, he was total micromanager. It was his first time to manage people, and extremely frustrating on my part. I suppose to me that was a learning, being on the receiving end of that, of what not to do when I'm managing someone, especially if they're a peer. But yeah, no, that was a huge blow to me, and probably on the upside, something that stemmed or planted the interest or planted the seed of what I'm interested in terms of how people relate in the workplace and what makes effective teams and all of that kind of stuff. And as an organization, how to avoid situations like that. They invested a lot of money in me in terms of salary, in terms of training, in terms of the visa sponsorship, all of that kind of stuff. They invested quite a lot of money, and I left that organization in less than a year and a half. So for them, like, that was a huge blow. But equally, on the individual side, how could I as an individual have made a better decision for my career? And how do I avoid going into those kind of situations, those kind of toxic environments?
Well, that sometimes you don't know until you get in there. Do you think there's a way of sussing out an environment to check to see if it is toxic before you go there?
That's a really great question, actually, because that is something I would like to explore further. I think that there is a way. I think there is a way that you can check those kinds of things. And I would love to explore that further. Going back to this concept of values and needs, I think maybe my values are not aligned. And if you can do some sort of, I don't know, is it a temperature check or something like that? And certainly at the time, I wouldn't have looked up the likes of Glassdoor, but now you have Glassdoor to kind of check, like, what
It's
do people
true.
think of the CEO? What do people think of, what's it like to work there? How long do people typically stay in that organization? What is the level of turnover like? Yeah.
So after you got mismanaged by your supervisor and then mismanaged by your peer, you were then somewhere else were tasked with managing a peer. How did you go?
Yeah, yeah. I was very aware of it. I think she handled it initially. She handled it well. She was given the option to be managed by me or to be managed by someone else, and she chose me. And I felt at times that, we had a conversation before I became her manager, and I said, listen, I've been through this. I've been managed by a peer, so I'm not going to make those same mistakes that he did, but perhaps I had some different kind of issues going on. I felt oftentimes she was quite defensive, and it's this perception of, this is again why I love that conversation about having those difficult conversations, because I think her perception was that I wasn't there to help her, that I was there to trip her up in some way. And that made for a bit more of a difficult conversation, especially the decisions around year end. At that time, I didn't know that, but the decisions were actually made at a higher level. And so then it was up to me as the manager to communicate what her rating, and don't get me started on a rant about the ratings and, the annual review process and all of that kind of stuff. Like, that is definitely something I would love to change in organizations. But the perception of my manager of her performance and her behavior were not very positive, and I had to communicate that message to her during the annual review process. And that was a very difficult conversation because it wasn't my decision. I would have given her an average score because she did quite well in some specific areas, but she really didn't do well in some other areas. So having that conversation, I think, was really, really hard. And I felt that she thought I was out to get her in some way. And it kind of ended with really toxic environment where, when she wasn't being managed by me anymore, when she had a new manager, like they restructured the organization, she just completely blanked me. So that wasn't that wasn't a positive experience for me at all. And again, what learnings can we take from this, and how can we ascertain whether people kind of work effectively in a team together, and things like that. I think we were coming at it from very different perspectives, and it may have been the organization in general that it was that kind of more manager rather than leader type of approach to management. And it was very much kind of telling rather than leading. And it was, people were free to manage their own clients, to do their own thing. I was managing my own clients at the same time, but also managing people. And I think that was a bit of a struggle as well, because it's finding that balance between people management and leading people, as well as managing my own clients as well, and balancing the time across those. I think if you're a manager and your role is to lead people, then that should be your sole role. I think that takes quite a lot of time. And I think if you're trying to get the best out of people, then that is in itself a full-time job. When I look back, there's definitely some things I could have done differently. And it is really about that, setting that clear intention that I am here to help you. I'm here to help you progress in the career. I think there was a lot of things that she wouldn't accept, or that were blind spots for her, but that she wouldn't acknowledge them, or she wouldn't accept them. So that was very, very difficult. Talk about, we spoke about self-awareness on my podcast, talking about self-awareness. It's how do you speak to someone if they don't want to accept your feedback at all?
They're too much in survival mode at that point, I reckon.
That's a good point, actually. And I think, hit the nail on the head there.
So yeah, if people feel that threatened, and whatever the trigger is, then you saying constructively, how can I help you be better and show you where your blind spots are? They're going to go, stay away.
Yeah.
or blow up or whatever. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So corporate land, you fast forward now. So you spent
That's what
however many years in corporate and decided to take the plunge and leave corporate. So tell me about that decision.
it wasn't an easy decision. And it's not something I would never have thought early in my career that I wanted to set up my own business. It wasn't an easy decision, but having described the different types of environments that I was in, maybe is it any surprise that it didn't really suit me? And I don't want to say like toxic environment, but for me, it was, let's say, a mismatch of values, or my needs weren't being satisfied in the workplace. So I decided to leave. I had a year where I did a diploma in coaching, thinking I'm going to change the world by becoming a coach, and I'm going to coach people on their careers to make better decisions. But I thought always the bigger picture is to focus on organizations and how they can create better environments so people can really, really thrive in that environment. I'm really passionate about the areas of, like, maybe not everyone can be a leader, and maybe not everyone wants to be a leader. There's all of these different aspects to it. I started my master's then while I was still finishing the coaching diploma. So I did a master's for 2 years part-time in organizational behavior. And in the process of doing the master's, then I set up the business originally as a coach, and it has sort of evolved and rebranded over time. And that's sort of where I am now, and working with organizations around similar kind of to you in terms of it's the people stuff. But for me, it's the using data and analytics and the research. My background is in research, and it's an area I'm really passionate about, really interested in. And one of my superpowers as well is this data side of things. So it's using all of that combined to help organizations to make better decisions around people. So especially around those areas I mentioned on values, needs, and strengths.
How do you use data to make decisions about people? Like what kind of data?
It's the HR data that is, or either the organization already has it, and they may have conducted their own internal surveys. And I have surveys that I can conduct in the organizations as well.
Employee and like engagement surveys, is that what you mean?
Engagement, looking at things like values, looking at need satisfaction, looking at strengths. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Cool. And what's been the hardest part and the easiest part about being CEO of your own business?
That is a good question. I think I went into business very naive. Like I said, when I set up the business originally, it was all about coaching. And I thought, how many hours are there in a week? How much can I charge per hour? Ta-da, I'm going to be a millionaire in a few years. This is great. Very, very naive. Although I had a degree in business, I just had no idea about what it takes to run a business. And for me, it's the hardest part is probably managing everything all at the same time. So you've got your marketing, you've got your business development, you've got your client work, you've got the operations, you've got the admin. You're managing and you are responsible for every single aspect of that business. And I think people who work in corporate probably have no idea, because they have someone in IT that they can call if their computer breaks down. They have someone who's doing all the marketing and the business development in the background. They're servicing the clients, or at least that was my experience. So for me, it's the overwhelm of managing everything simultaneously. The easiest part maybe is building new relationships. So that's something I really, really enjoy doing. So, reaching out to people like you to connect, doing things. And something I didn't know that I was good at, or that was maybe that other people perceive it as a strength in me, is synthesizing information. So being able to have a conversation on a podcast, and then after that podcast, synthesizing that information to pull out what are the key points and what do you need to do differently as a result of listening to this podcast. And it stood to me when I was doing assignments for the masters, and definitely when I'm doing and just in day-to-day conversation, if someone says something, I can be like, oh, and is this what you meant by? And they're like, yeah, actually, thanks for kind of just picking out the main points and throwing it back at me. So that's something I didn't know that I was good at, but definitely something I enjoy and comes naturally.
That's awesome. I love that superpower. It's a good one. So tell us about your podcast. Is it Happiness at Work or Happier at Work?
Happier at Work. Yeah. 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 I started it back in August of 2019, I think it was. So it's going about nearly a year and a half. It's at nearly 15,000 downloads or listens or whatever people call it these days. I absolutely love doing it. It's interview based. So much like your own, it's conversational. I get people on to share what their perspectives are. It'll be something specific. It's 4 different themes. So it'll be around leadership. It's around the future of work, diversity and inclusion, and well-being at work. So kind of 4 general themes that people come on and share their insights on. I love having those conversations. I'm also in the process of doing some solo casting. So like 10-minute bite-sized stuff that people can just listen to kind of quickly, but still take some insights away and show my own expertise rather than just having other people doing all the talking as well.
Sure.
Yeah, really, really enjoy it. It's available wherever you listen to podcasts. Happier at Work.
That's great. So you've shared lots of really important tips today, particularly around fitting in. I mean, I think those were pretty powerful around values alignment, needs matching, and competency and skill match. Competency and
Yeah.
Demands and abilities. Yeah.
Demands and abilities, which is the least important. But I think for me, I would love to see organizations focusing more on strengths. So like, what are someone's strengths and how do we elevate those? And how do we kind of diminish the weaknesses? Because, everyone has their areas that they're not particularly good at, but how do you complement them in some way?
Yeah, that's fabulous. So if you were to give a simple tip for helping someone be happier at work, what would that be?
I think for me, I think values are fundamental. So understanding what your own core values are and really checking with yourself whether those values align with the organization that you're working in. So for me, it's really crucial.
Okay.
And if you're anything like me, you don't know what your values are. Like I certainly didn't a few years ago.
Yeah.
Maybe you have done that work and you know what your values are. And it's not a simple process, and it may take a while to do it. You might notice different things that bother you or different things that you value that are important. So definitely do the work.
I love it. And this is my very last question, I promise. What is your tip to leaders to help develop others? So that's the theme of the podcast for this quarter, is developing others. So if you're going to counsel leaders about developing team members, what is one thing that they could do?
I think look at things from other people's perspective. So ask them what it is that they want. So oftentimes if we're developing other people, we're doing things because it's what we want, but maybe check in with them to see exactly what it is that they want.
So simple.
Is that too simplistic though?
No, it's simple and yet so useful. Check what they want, So often we don't, I think. We think, they're going to love this opportunity. Like, for example, you made the assumption that, other people are ambitious just like you, and then you assume other people like that and they're not. So it's like, hey, would you value this opportunity? And be like, nope. Oh.
Yeah. Not on my agenda at all.
Awesome. Where can people find you, Aoife?
Happieratwork.ie, my new website. It's launching in the next couple of weeks. It's kind of quietly ticking away behind the scenes at the moment. Happieratwork.ie. I'm across all social media as well. So I'm on Instagram, happieratwork.ie. I'm on Twitter, happieratworkhq. You'll find me on Facebook, and I tend to hang out on LinkedIn most. Maybe have a look at the show notes for the spelling of my name, because it is unusual for anyone outside of Ireland. It's Aoife O'Brien, Aoife O'Brien.
Thank you so much, Aoife. It's been a pleasure talking to you. You are a treasure.
Thank you so much, Zoe. I absolutely loved our conversation today.
Well, that was a very interesting interview. I found it fascinating that Aoife's research found a map, or a blueprint, I guess, to helping people fit in at work, whether you're choosing to work somewhere or whether you are a leader, crafting an environment and matching people to the environment so that they can thrive at work. And the 3 aspects of that, which are, alignment of values, that seems like a really important piece and a really useful one. You can check out the recording I did on values if you want a map to try and figure out where you sit. And we'll put a link in the show notes to that particular episode at the end of 2020 where I did a little solo-sode on values and values hierarchy. So values is the important piece there. And the second piece is about need satisfaction around autonomy, relatedness, and competence. And that's sort of aligned to some of the neuroscience research I've read from David Rock and also around Daniel Pink's work, Drive, which looked at what makes a good place to work, which he says is mastery, autonomy, and purpose. So there's alignment in terms of those two bodies of research there. And the third piece, which is matching demands and abilities, which is straight out of flow science, which means that your skill needs to be matched to the task, but your skill needs to be stretched a little bit so that you are finding yourself being pulled into this creative place where you need to problem solve to meet the solutions. But you don't want to be snapped. You want to be stretched and not snapped. So I love that her research has integrated all those three things. And it highlights to me from this conversation and from previous conversations how important it is to think deliberately and strategically about culture. You just cannot let it unfold. And so leaders need to be stewards and intentional about the kind of culture that they want to craft. And I think Aoife's work helps us to do that, to keep in mind some of these key aspects when it comes to developing others, which is our theme for this quarter. Developing other leaders as leaders is a really important responsibility. So we need to master ourselves so that we have the energy and focus to do that. And Aoife's insights give us a few tools to get on with it. All right, I'd love to hear your insights. Feel free to leave a comment on the Facebook page about your insights around developing other leaders or your experiences about fitting in or not fitting in to a workplace. We can all learn from each other's experiences. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.